Time. Let's maybe take our seats and start to get ready.
Forget how to use this. Do you remember how to use this?
6, 7, 6. Who do we have? Sylvia, Chad, and Michelle.
Welcome. This is the Budget Committee of the City Council. We are going to get started with our, this would be our actual fourth budget meeting. And I would point out that for the members of the council, we do have minutes from May 27th, May 28th at 11, and May 28th at 6. So we have the last 3 minutes in front of you to peruse at your leisure. But I am going to call the budget meeting to order. And I guess at this point in time, I am going to turn it over. I'm trying to decide. I turn it over to the city manager, who will then turn us to our budget team for review.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So the objective in this budget process is to make this as simple as possible. And the primary difference that you're going to see from the way we did it last year is last year we spent several meetings bringing each of the departments forward and providing an overview of the departments. What we are attempting to do this year is to present to you the recommended budget and the structure. And I know Nikki and Doug will get into this in much more detail, so I'll stay at 30,000 feet. The structure is the 2014 budget. We add to that the increases in the budget that are contractual or previously agreed on or just really needed at this particular point. And that creates the 2015 budget prior to the reductions in the budget necessary to provide a structurally balanced budget. So what you really, and then we're going to recommend those reductions to the 2015 budget to end up with the actual recommended budget, if that makes any sense. So what's interesting about this is we've identified every one of those increases that are going to occur in 2015 to create the contractual obligations. We're going to identify what the deficit to the structural budget would be at that point, and then we're going to recommend cuts or reductions in the budget to get down to a structurally balanced budget. To circle back to how this impacts the departments, as we explain the budget change, whether it's an increase or decrease, we're going to do our best up here to explain it, but we're going to make the department head available to come up and answer any questions as to how does that change impact their operations and provide you an opportunity to answer any questions or ask any questions of them. The nice thing is it allows you to interact with the departments at the point of the spear as it impacts the budget, as opposed to going back and hearing virtually the same story we hear a lot. Now, what does that mean from the long term? As the year develops, we're trying to make budgeting a continuing year-long process. And what part of that is we've started with the updated revenue and expenditure reports that Brandon and team have been putting together. But we're also going to make departments available every month. We'll pick a department and they'll come up and they'll provide an overview of the department in a less hurried manner so people can interact with the departments. So that's what we're going to do. Page 8 is going to become your best friend. In the document, that is the sheet that I am referencing that Nikki has put together, and it starts with the 14, it works through the increases, it works through the subtractions, and it ends up with a balanced budget. So we will, during the next, if you're starting to study for your final exam, this is the page you want to pay attention to. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Nikki. And I know last year, and I won't make any reference to anybody, Councilmember Harmon, but last year there was a lot of concern about the number of pages and papers and dates and identifying marks on those papers. So we're going to try to manage that really well this year, understanding that there's going to be questions that are asked. We're going to try to respond to those things at the beginning of the next meeting. But we're gonna start each meeting with a housekeeping section, and I'm gonna turn this over to Nikki now. She'll just do the housekeeping, then Doug will kick off the official meeting, and then we'll go. If that's okay with you, Deputy Mayor.
Absolutely.
Morning, Deputy Mayor, Mayor, and City Council. Thank you for joining us this morning. A few housekeeping items. You have a few pages in front of you other than the agenda and the minutes. One is called 2015 Budget Key Key Takeaways. What this is similar to a budget talking points document that you all had seen, but there were a few minor changes before we presented the document to the media. So this sheet that you have in front of you is the exact sheet as it was presented to the media to help them understand the budget. So we just wanted to have you, again, have that sheet in front of you. It's information we've already reviewed with you and you've already seen, but it may be formatted slightly differently. In addition to that, behind there's a couple of pages for the fire department. I realize that this was left out of your binders. So if you open up to your fire department section, open up to page 30. And just right behind there, if you can just slip in these 2 pages. They don't have numbers on them because I didn't want to throw off the numbering of the rest of the book, because throughout the process I'm going to be referring to all the pages. So to number these would throw everything off. So just slip those in there if you will, please. These are available on the online version, so it is available in the proposed book. It wasn't left out of anything or changed. It just simply was left out of your original binders. In addition to that, a few housekeeping items. We certainly recognize that a break would probably be appreciated by everybody, so as long as the Deputy Mayor is okay with it, we thought that break could occur around 10:30, but we'll have her make that call once we get to 10:30 if it seems like a natural breaking point. But certainly, as you all know, at any point if you need to get up and use the restroom, you go out these doors and kind of straight back, you'll find the restrooms there. Also, we've got refreshments up here you can grab as needed. Of course, if you have any other questions about the logistics or the setup, let us know at any time.
Does anybody have any questions before we move on to Doug? Okay, go ahead.
Deputy Mayor, thank you. I thought I would just make a very brief set of comments, maybe 30 seconds worth, to try to kick this off in the appropriate manner. I was talking with some staff before the meeting this morning, and I was relaying that this is the 17th budget I've done during my career. That's probably more than some people, but less than some people in the audience and around the table. And each time I do this, I get butterflies in my stomach. And this morning is no exception. You know, we're nervous. We want to make sure this goes well. We want to make sure we present you with the right information and that we're able to answer your questions correctly, and then the process goes smoothly, especially since although we've all done budgets in the past, this is really our first time with you, and so we want to make sure it goes correctly. So in addition to being nervous, I'm incredibly excited. This is one of my favorite times of the year. I'm maybe a little bit weird that way, but this is just an exciting time. We are all willing to give up a Saturday morning to come and talk about the future of the city of Topeka, and I think that's a pretty powerful thing. And that, you know, honestly, it gives me goosebumps because we're all working towards a common goal of making Topeka better for the future. We're going to have some candid conversations, maybe even some disagreements about policy issues and things like that, but in the end, we're all working towards the same common goal, and that's an exciting thing, that we're all willing to give up our time away from our families and friends and whatever we normally do on a Saturday. You know, for me, this is 2 hours earlier than I would normally be up on a Saturday, so that it's just an exciting thing, and I want to just emphasize that I'd like to carry that through this process. Yeah, we're going to grind through some things, but there's an excitement. I'm excited. I hope you are. And with that, I will turn it back over to Nikki to start talking you through the book. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we get started with the budget overview, I just wanted to walk through a little bit of the format and the layout of your proposed budget book. For the most part, we left the majority of the books similar to previous years because we felt like, you know, for you all every year to see it in the same format, it would allow you to stay familiar with it. It seemed to be a very document that worked really well in the past. So in general, it's split up into similar sections as you've seen before. And I'm going to walk through those sections. Also, it's available online in the same breakout. So for members of the public, if they go to topeka.org/budget, they'll have the same document that you all have in front of you, and it'll be split up into the same sections just for everybody's ease. So the beginning of the book here, the first 15 pages are really the introductory section. And just for you all know, it begins with kind of an overview from the city manager speaking about what are the big themes of the budget, what are some important things to point out, both for you and the public to be able to have a snapshot of really what's included in the budget. Following, if you go through page 6 in here, is a budget calendar, and the budget calendar really, I think, serves as a really helpful document to also remind everybody about what the process and what the next steps will be. So on the budget calendar, it lays out the next 2 budget committee meetings, which they'll all have separate agendas for, and they're all available, times and locations are available online. Following that in July, by mid-July, we will be finalizing our budget decisions with the City Council, all with the goal of setting up in time to have a public hearing in August, to be followed by the official adoption of the budget August 12th. And that really is all to meet the deadline of August 25th, which is when we're required to submit our budget to the state and to the county. So really that kind of reminds you why we're meeting right now, why do we start meeting in June. It's all really to back into that date in August that we're working towards. Following page 7 in there is a layout of all of the fund expenditures. So this is really the expenditure budget summary. And we have detailed sheets for all of the departments and all of the funds following throughout the rest of the budget book. So we'll get into all of these in as much detail as you want, but I think it's very helpful to see the total budget laid out all in one sheet. So that's what this sheet provides for you. Page 8 we will become intimately familiar with. That's the agenda item number 2 to go through the general fund changes. We're going to use page 8 really to walk through all of that. So we'll be coming back to that page. And the following pages in the introduction really walk through the revenues. Page 9 talks about the revenues for all of the funds. And again, all of the funds have detailed fund summary sheets in the back of the book, which we'll go through all of them that talk about our revenues, our revenue projections, where we think those funds are going. And then following, there's a few pages that go into all of our, what we consider our most major revenue sources. It lays out our assumptions for the sales tax, property tax, and all the different, I guess, major revenue sources, and gets a little bit into a couple of years of actual history, 1 year of budget, and then our 2015 proposed budget. So that'll be really helpful as we talk more about the revenues, more about our assumptions. This should be a good reference sheet for you. Following, we have all of the department sections, and they should be separated out by tab. These are all of our operational departments here in the city. And if you can open to one, let's open up to page 16 here. This is the City Council budget. So just want to remind you the format here. Every department begins with what we're calling, really it's the pie chart that separates it out by major category. When we talk about budget, lots of times we talk about major category. We talk about personal services, which is wages and benefits, contractual services, which are anything that we really have to contract for. Are you all with me?
Yes.
So contractual services would be things that we pay other organizations or other things to provide services for us. Commodities, those are things that we're buying. That's fuel, those are materials, things like that. Capital outlay would be any of our capital items or capital payments, and then other is kind of a catch-all for a few other things. So really the pie chart serves just to give you an overview of what the majority of a department's expenditures, what category those hit. Following that, for every department, there's what we call a cost of service page. For the City Council, you all really have one major function, and that is to serve as the City Council. But other departments, especially ones like Public Works, Police, have multiple divisions with multiple programs. So what we do is we break out the department budget by program so you can really tell, well, how much do we spend on this certain service that this department provides? So that's really the purpose of these pages. These pages also tell you what funds support those departments. So the City Council is supported primarily by, actually all by the general fund, but other departments have multiple funds. So this would be the sheet that tells you which all funds support this specific department. And then finally on page 18, there's a line item breakout for each department, and you'll see these are all of the accounting units that we use in the city and all of the separate accounts just to show you details. We have 2 years of actual history. We have 1 year of the 2014 adopted budget, and then the 2015 budget is highlighted in blue. That's the proposed budget that we really want to focus on today. And then a variance column so you can see really quickly and easily what are the items that change the most from 15 over 14. You can really just spot those pretty easily there. Just a reminder that the expense line in blue is the total for the department, and it sums up. That's kind of counterintuitive, but we show the total for departments. It's in the blue lines that are the top of all the listed out expenditures. If you keep going past all the department sections, you'll get to the risk fund section towards the back of the book there. So in the back of the book is where we really get into all of the other fund summaries. So if you all can open up to page 130, just wanted to quickly remind you of what a fund summary sheet looks like as compared to a department breakout sheet. Page 130, this is our group health insurance. This is really our health fund, and what we do at the top of each page is list out what the fund number is. We list the beginning and the ending balance. This is a very important thing when we're budgeting by fund. We want to pay attention to how much money is in that fund. And we explain to everybody, and we also have a sheet in the introduction that explains that this year we're going to be talking more about our cash balance than our fund balance. So if you start at the top of the sheet, it's labeled GAAP budget, and that is the old way of looking at the fund balance, and that's the way that we looked at the 12, 13, and 14 budgets. Once you get into 15, it's labeled cash balance. And as we go through every fund, we'll really answer everybody's questions and talk about why is the fund balance different than the cash balance in that specific fund. In addition, below, in the fund summary sheets, we list out all of the revenues. For the department sheets, we only list the expenditures because for the most part, revenues are for the whole city, not for specific departments. But for each separate fund, they have particular revenues that go into that fund. Revenues are shown as negative, and really that's an accounting. In our accounting system, revenues are negative, expenditures are positive. So those are all listed as negatives, but just so you know, those are revenues. And then there's also an expenditure total highlighted in blue on each of the fund summary sheets. Following the risk funds section, there's a section that says long-term obligations. And really the funds that we tried to put in this section were any of the funds that kind of guide some of our long-term. A lot of them are capital investments. For example, the debt service fund, the citywide half-cent sales tax. So funds that really speak to what are some of our long-term choices are in this section here. Following there, you'll see it gets into some of the miscellaneous programs and funds. And what this is that we have a couple of funds that really don't fall into one of those other categories. And then in addition, we have some programs that really don't belong in a specific department but are worth highlighting. For example, our support of the cemeteries, we like to split that out so you all can be very clear how much money do we spend supporting the cemeteries. But it's really not its own fund, nor is it its own department. So that's really the catch-all where we put a lot of those types of programs. And then in the very back behind other, you'll see a property tax digest for 20 years. This is a sheet that we've provided in the past and gives you a very helpful overview of our mill levy and our property tax for the past 20 years. That's page 187. And then starting on page 188 is our personnel summary. That's a breakout of all of our total employees by department, really to show you how that all breaks out and how it ends up in our total FTE count. So are there any questions about just the overview of the budget book before we go into it, or the format of the budget book? We're going to be referencing this, I mean, really throughout all the budget committee meetings, so I just want to make sure that this makes sense to you. It's a helpful tool to you. Certainly if there's anything that you think would be helpful, we can provide that as a supplement at a later date.
Does anybody have any comments or questions before we go on? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, if you guys are ready to dive into agenda item number 2. The focus of today's budget committee meeting is to really dive into the general fund. You'll see from the agendas that we've designated both today and Monday to talk as much about the general fund as we need to. Of course, we spend a lot of time on the general fund because it's the majority of our budget. So that's what the next few days are going to be focused on. The 24th, the next committee meeting on June 24th is when we'll really get into the other funds, so any of the risk funds, any of the utility funds. Certainly if something that comes up today or Monday relates to one of those, we can certainly talk about all those funds. We're ready at any point, but we just thought we would designate that night to really take a deep dive into all of those funds. That way we could really focus on just the general fund changes today. Okay, so if you open up to page 8 there, it starts at the top with an overview of our general fund budget, really just 2014 next to 2015. The 2014 budget, as you see it, the budget that you adopted, the revenues equal the expenditures. For the 2015 budget, as you can see, there's a slight increase to the overall general fund budget, and the reason for this is really a natural growth in our revenues, which we can talk about if you'd like to, but overall it's about a 2% increase from the 2014 budget to the 2015 budget, which is a very natural growth if you're looking at a lot of just kind of costs of living, keeping up with inflation. That's a very appropriate growth year over year. So the revenues in the proposed budget equal $88 million in the general fund, and expenditure at this point are a little bit under that. They're actually proposed at $307,000 below that. And the reason is we're really wanting to show that to you, to show that there's a little bit of flexibility there. We can have some conversations about where we want the total expenditures to end, but this is how everything ended up as we went into the budget process. So moving down from there, the way this is laid out is, what this is in order, any of the major increases to an expenditure, either a category or a program or a position. It lays out the 2014 budget next to the 2015 proposed budget and the amount of increase. So as you can see, this goes from the top down to the items that had the biggest increase down to the items that had the least increase. And really what this does is this captures any item that we considered significant, which is for the most part any item that was either about $50,000 or more or carried a lot of significance we listed on the sheet. Of course, there's specific accounts and departments that maybe one item went up $5,000, but they decrease another item by that same amount. We couldn't list out every single increase only because it would just be too many to talk about, so we're really focusing on the major. And then also to the same note, we'll get into the expenditure decreases. So these are items that we or departments reduce in order to absorb some of the cost increases. And then down below, we also, of course, had some significant revenue impacts that changed from the 14 to 15 budget. So to start off on the top, the first item that was the biggest increase from the 14 budget to the 15 budget was full-time salaries. And the way that this is noticed here is that this is the cost of contractually obligated wages and 1% for all else. So the contractually obligated wages, what this refers to for the most part are any of the labor contracts that had been settled going into the 2015 budget that we already knew about what the impacts would be in the 15 budget have been included in this budget. Specifically, that's the cost of the fire and police agreements. Labor, you all approved steps for them for both the 2014 budget and the 2015 budget, and this reflects the cost of those increases into this budget. For all other employees, what this includes is a 1% increase to the base pay, and then of course benefits are detailed below. Of course that affects some of the benefits as well, but this really shows what the impact of that 1% is on just full-time salaries in the general fund budget.
Question? Yes, Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you. Just overall with this number, this morning's paper, or yesterday's, whatever it was, said that in this budget there was a total of 9.25, I believe, new additional positions. And I only see 3 below, and I wondered where they are.
Okay. Good.
This didn't look like enough money, for instance, and so I just didn't know.
Councilwoman Hiller, what you're looking at, of course, is a general fund summary. Some of the new positions are contained in the wastewater fund and the stormwater fund.
Okay.
So you'll see those reflected more clearly as we move to those discussions.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Yes.
Yeah,
Mr.
thank-
Mayor?
Thank you. On that, I noticed that, I think, the police department benefits are stated separately. That first line item, does that include the, benefits in general?
That first,
Yeah.
thank you,
If you
Mayor,
could
that's a
speak to
very
that.
good question. That first item is literally just full-time salaries line.
Okay.
So that does not include any of the benefits. Of course, benefits were increased and impacted, and we'll get into especially KP&F, so contributions for retirement. If people are making more, we're paying more for their retirement. Same thing with CAPERS. Those were the ones that, if we increase full-time salaries, those are the benefits that are really most directly impacted. So we've tried to list those all out separately as well.
Okay, thank you.
And just to circle back to Councilwoman Hiller, there is the other half, it's actually 9.5 positions. There is a 0.5 position that's going to be in the health fund, which we can talk about. And there is one position that's added to the general fund, and it's listed down below as a management analyst. We'll get more into the details either now or later as we go down the list, but this is an addition of one new position to the general fund.
Okay, I see no other questions or comments, so proceed.
So the next biggest impact to the general fund for the 15 budget is the cost of KP&F, and I'm sure you're all familiar that this is the cost that we're required to contribute towards. This is police and fire retirement. This is a number that is set by the CAPERS board. So this number is provided to us when we ask for it. They're the ones that set this number. Just so you know, just to have a little bit of a scope here, the number that we use in the 15 budget was 21.36%. So for every dollar that a police or fire officer makes, either in full-time salaries and overtime and any kind of pay, we pay that percentage of retirement on that amount. So really the increase in KP&F is due not only to that percentage increasing, but also if people are making more, we're contributing that much more to their retirements. In the 2014 budget, the assumption that was used for KP&F was 18.76. So even if we kept salaries exactly even from 14 or 15, KP&F would increase a little bit because that percentage increase, we have to contribute more due to that percentage increase.
Does anybody have any questions? I would just follow up on that. That percentage increase doesn't come from us. As you said, it comes from the state.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. Manspeaker.
And when we're negotiating those contracts, do we include that percentage in the overall increase of the wages and benefits? So if you come to us and say it's gonna be a 3% increase, part of that 3% is the increase in P&F, right?
That's correct, Councilman Manspeaker. We include those costs when we do a cost analysis.
Yes, follow up, Mrs. Hiller.
Just to clarify for new council members, correct me if I'm wrong, for police and fire, that's their benefits, but the health benefits are on top of that. So.
Okay, is there any other comments or questions? Go ahead and keep going, thank you.
So down the line there, I apologize for the acronym, PD, that's the Topeka Police Department Employee Benefits. What the police department does in their budget is they actually, I guess they put the cost of the benefits associated with holiday pay, overtime, callback, standby, and shift differential into its own account, which we call just generic employee benefits. And really what that does is that just separates the cost of benefits associated with those items separate from the item. That way we can really track what's the impact of overtime versus the benefits that are associated with it, because both of those are very important things to track. So what this is a result of if employees are making more, then they're also making more for overtime, holiday pay. All of those items are based on the amount of money that is being made in the first place. And if items like KP&F are increased, then that's also going to increase the amount of money that we pay on benefits. So this is a very important item that I think is important to kind of keep separate and keep track of, so you know really the total costs of any increase.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah. Could you speak to the significant increase from 14 to 15? Either we had very few benefits a year ago and we
Sure.
greatly increased them, or?
A part of this is a technicality that the police department has changed a little bit how they're budgeting for their benefits. So in 15, they decided they want to put all of the associated benefits with those categories into this account to better track for it. So that's really the most of it, is that before it was just shown in different accounts. But a significant portion of that is just due to the increase in the amount of money that employees are making, so it's also going to increase the benefit line. And the police department said, and I'm sure they would confirm this if necessary, that they didn't necessarily budget for more overtime or holiday pay. This doesn't include more hours of overtime or more hours of holiday pay. This is just the associated benefit increase with those separate items.
Okay. You have
Yeah,
follow-up?
thank you.
Yes,
A
Mrs.
quick-
Hiller.
Quick clarification. So this line is just the benefits, or is it the pay and benefits for that extra time?
Benefits.
Benefits only. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay.
Okay, now we're moving down to facilities, which I've labeled here as an internal service fee. This is a relatively new fee. As you all know, starting in 2013, the Facilities Fund was established. Facilities used to be a division within the Public Works Department, as I understand it, in the general fund. So any costs that were related to keeping up our own, these are city facilities, were paid out of the general fund as part of a department. A couple of years ago, it was decided that we wanted to designate those costs out so we could really tell how much is it costing us to maintain our facilities. And how we are funding that separate fund, which has been established, is by charging our own departments, both in the general fund and all of the funds, for those costs to maintain facilities. And the way that that charge is really decided is it's based, number one, on square footage. So if you're a department that covers a big area, you're probably going to cost more to upkeep, so you're going to have a larger charge than another department. In addition, it also takes into account tickets or work orders, which we create internally. So if you're a department, you might have a small area, but you might have a very old facility, one that really takes a lot to upkeep. So that you may have an additional charge to your department because of all of those items that you need to upkeep. So really what this is kind of what the facilities fund has to figure out every year is how many revenues it needs to keep up, what it needs to provide to keep up our facilities. And really in 15, it needs more revenue than we designated in the past to keep up the facilities and pay for the employees that are serviced out of this fund. So this resulted in about a $311,000 increase to general fund departments just to keep up our facilities.
Questions? No? Okay. Oh, sorry, Mr. Smith.
Is that just maintenance of facilities, or does that include, like projects? I know there was an issue on the second floor, I think, at the, I think there was a plumbing issue or something. Is that included in that, or is that just maintenance?
That's a good question. I'll answer you a little bit, and then maybe I'll have Doug Whitaker come up and answer any details. He oversees the facilities division. The majority of it is for maintenance. The intention with this fund is that it would build up enough of a balance that it would cover minor projects. So the idea is that anything that wouldn't hit the CIP, so any projects under, for example, $50,000, we want to pay for out of cash rather than put into a capital improvement program. So the idea is that this would include a certain number of projects, including the second floor. Facilities has a long list of projects that they need to get to depending on how much cash allows. I would say that in this fund, only being a couple of years old, we're still working out how many dollars every year is going to be used for projects versus general maintenance. So I think every year we're trying to bulk up that more of this can be used towards projects, but I'll certainly have the department director answer any more details on that.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you, Council. Primarily, it's just the routine maintenance sets the fee for 15, so we're still playing some catch up, and we had to do some scrambling when I came in last year to survive 13 because we didn't quite set the fees where we needed to. You know, things that happen, I don't want to give you a long list, but like a water line broke in the middle of one of the zoo buildings in 13. Well, that was an expense we didn't expect, but obviously you got to fix the water line under the floor, et cetera. So those are major things that we're basically doing. And then preventive maintenance, you know, maintaining, you know, obviously just maintaining HVAC equipment, elevator equipment, all of that type of equipment, doing the preventive maintenance on that, and then, you know, doing whatever, you know, small projects we can do right now. We're in the process of developing that more of what I would call more capital projects, you know, those major things that we need to go out and do in our facilities, and then we'd have to figure out, you know, when I say figure out, determine a funding source from that. But primarily this is just maintaining those facilities, et cetera.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Go ahead, Ms. Siller.
I had asked staff earlier what the status was of the Vermont Energy Report and all the various energy conservation improvements that have been proposed for the buildings, and maybe this is a good time to ask where that fits in this fund versus a capital improvement, or where it is at all.
Okay. Primarily, that was, yes, we had the study. As you know, we've had some discussions, and I've probably had some discussions with others on it, is when that whole process came out and we started looking at it, it was the term to finance and do what they were doing just didn't meet the sniff test. So we're still looking through that, and in fact, that particular firm has kind of disappeared off the face of the earth from the standpoint of their local people. I don't know what happened, and we've tried to stay in contact with them. So, but what we have done, and I did want to, you know, do as far as, are we looking at our energy, and that's what it was looking at, how do we reduce our energy expenses, et cetera. Are we doing things? Yes. I mean, our major facilities, we changed out like here to the T8 lamps in this facility in Holiday and City Hall. Some other things that we have done with our own staff and utilizing cash, you know, we're not out there financing anything, is my understanding is Fire Station 11 has been upgraded with its lighting. Fire Station 5, I guess, was renovated a couple of years ago, so obviously we put in the more energy efficient lighting. We changed to gotten away from the boilers and gone to heat pump type equipment. So those are things that we're trying to do. The equipment maintenance garage right now, I was amazed that when I went down there, you basically needed flashlights to see your way around the building. We're now upgrading to more, you know, the LED type lighting to give them better lighting that also is more energy efficient. And then other things that we've done out there is any of the street light projects that we have been doing where we are putting street lights in with our newer roads, we are going to the LED fixture. So therefore it should, you know, that will reduce, because obviously we have to pay for the electricity for that. That's with what we as the city put in. Our program with Westar is more of a tariff, and there's a set bulb that they provide and like that. So although I will say just as a FYI, the new power poles, you know, they're putting down 6 and Gage and down Fairlawn. When they change out those street lights, they are going to change those to LEDs as they've talked to us. So again, those are the things that we're doing that we aren't going out and borrowing money to do. We're doing with cash, is trying to reduce our energy consumption. Does that really fit into the facilities fund? No, because my understanding is, and correct, you know, finance will straighten me out here, is I think electrical costs are charged to the department.
Yes.
So like this building primarily would be law enforcement. They pay for the electricity, so that doesn't really reflect in this fund, but it does, you know, obviously save energy and reduce energy costs overall.
Thank you. I appreciate the report, and you know, one of the things we talked about was the change in light bulbs seemed to be something we could do without great expense. So there's a lot left in those recommendations, as I recall.
Right.
Correct? But thank you. Good to hear the progress. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Manspeaker.
Just to clarify, those recommendations cost about $20 million, so
I know.
there's no way that we can pull it off just nickel and diming here and there. It's a big overall project. My question is, when you put in new lights, like say on 17th Street, the old lights that that are higher up, is there a reason why we have to continue to have those and we can't just use the lights that are down lower?
I'll have to get you an exact answer. My assumption is those were possibly Westar lights. They have to take them down. And so I'll get you an answer on that one. I wasn't aware they were up on top of there.
And then on the Westar deal, they determine which bulb we can put in their lights?
The tariff that was set, we had a meeting with them. The tariff, there is a tariff or, you know, a fund, what do I want to say, a charge they can give to us for a light. It set it at what type of bulb that, you know, we were set for. So whether it was a 100-watt bulb, then they would charge us, obviously it would take, you know, less energy. We would get charged one tariff. If it's a 250, you know, we would get charged another tariff. So it's kind of in their tariff that just to say turn them off or change bulbs or those type things, there's some in that rate, you know, on their side of the house that I don't know as I can explain it all, but that's how it's set. But they provide the fixture, the bulb, they do all the maintenance, everything. So there's just a, you know, a fee that we pay for those street lights.
And then do we renegotiate that tariff?
It's actually, no, I believe it's in their rate with the PUC or however they do it. It's not actually with us. It would be what they charge, you know, a tariff that they charge across, you know, their service area.
And then the only reason I bring up 17th Street is that LED lights versus the old incandescents are two different colors.
Yes.
And it looks very weird.
Yeah. So
thank you.
I will check into that. Thank you.
Mrs. Hiller?
Real quickly across the table, we did take out the overheads when some of the lighting went in on Washburn Lane Parkway. The discussion then was not only saving our fees to Westar, but also just the clutter of the lines that zigzag across the street. So we did do it before. Thank you.
Anything else? All right, let's move on.
Thank you. Ready?
Yes.
Okay, moving on, the next item on the list there is retirement reserve. What this is that we have a fund, it's one of the risk funds detailed in the back of the book called retirement reserve, and this is the fund that we use when we have retirees leave the city. We pay out based on how much sick and vacation, and most of it's determined specifically in their labor contracts, how much we're able to pay out, and those come out of this fund. The reason it's in a separate fund is some of those can be pretty significant. As you can imagine, for an employee that's been here a long time and earned a lot of time, sometimes those are in the thousands of dollars. So really to protect all of the other funds, we have a retirement reserve fund. The way that this is funded is that every department in all of the different funds are charged a certain percentage based on how the employees make, and that money goes into the retirement reserve fund to be built up for when those retirements come out. We track our retirements, and we have a pretty big bubble in 2014 and 2015. It's kind of the baby boomer. A lot of people are starting to retire. Related to this, if you remember, at the very end of 2013, the Employee Separation Fund was established, and that was a separate fund that's funded by general obligation bonds that would help get through really the bubble of retirees, because based on our analysis, we were going to have spent out a lot of money, and the retirement reserve fund wasn't healthy enough to pay those out on its own, so the Employee Separation Fund was established. So until that Employee Separation Fund is spent down, we will keep paying out of that fund, but in the meanwhile, we have to keep building up the Retirement Reserve Fund. Otherwise, once those bonds are gone, we either get more or we have no money in the Retirement Reserve Fund to continue paying out of our operating funds. So what this is an internal charge that's made to the general fund. This is the amount increase in the 15 budget over 14. This is actually based on the percentage that we've always used for the recent history. In 14, one of the, I guess, solutions to cut the budget was to reduce our general fund contributions to retirement reserve. So this $500,000 that you see in 14, that was actually lower than what we would have liked to give to the fund, because that was presented as one of the budget savings. So it's not really that 15 is any more than what we normally contribute. It just looks bigger compared to the 14, which was decreased.
Okay.
Next on the list is the police vehicle lease fees, and certainly if you all have specific questions about how we're handling the fleet in the police department, the chief or his designee is definitely here to answer. As I understand it, as part of the 2013 CIP, a plan was presented to you all to every year contribute a little bit more towards leasing police vehicles. And what this is that each of our departments, whenever they need new vehicles, pays for their vehicles out of their own operating funds. So if departments don't have enough money, sometimes in the past they just won't replace their vehicles. Well, that might work in certain departments, but as you know, the police department can't function with operating vehicles. So a couple of years ago, we went to a model where we actually started leasing vehicles, and as I understand it, that's been a pretty successful model. But every year, the cost of leasing a few more vehicles every year has been going up, and this was laid out in a plan a couple of years ago. And so in 2015, we knew this going into 15, we increased the vehicle lease from $600,000 up to $900,000.
Any questions? Yes, Ms. Ortiz.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Is that because it's more vehicles?
Chief, are you prepared to speak to this? Thank you.
Chief is always prepared. I know we were doing like 30 cars.
Approximately 30 vehicles on a lease purchase, a 3-year lease purchase. So what we do is we lease, the first year we leased 30 vehicles, but we had 3 years worth of payments. The second year, we leased 30 more vehicles, so we had the second year of the first lease and the first year of the second lease. The projection is for the third year, we will have the third year of the first lease, the second year of the second lease, and the first year of the third lease.
Right.
Well, that adds up to $900,000.
Okay.
So what we're trying to do is account for the first year of that lease from vacancy credit or salary savings. And then we budget into the budget the second year and the third year of the lease, so that the first year we're absorbing that, and the second year allows the council to budget, finance to budget the second and third year of the lease. So the third year, the 3 years of the first lease will fall off, and then the decision will be made whether we lease again so that it never exceeds $900,000. And after 3 years, we have the vehicles paid off. We don't want to lease for 5 years, because if you lease for 5 years, the last couple of years of the lease, the cars are worn out, but we're still making payments on them. So we lease it for 36 months, lease purchase for 36 months. At the end of 36 months, we own the car, and we spread the payments out in digestible amounts over a 3-year period.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Yep. Any other questions or comments? Oh, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. After these 3 years, what % of our vehicles have been replaced? Are we getting to the point where we are over the hump in having a good reasonably up-to-date fleet?
We are getting, we're getting there a little at a time. You know, there was a couple of years, some years back, when we didn't buy cars, we didn't lease cars, we didn't have any cars. And we pretty much wore them out. Then there was a year that $267,000 was given to the police department to purchase vehicles. Well, we needed a lot. So we bought some used vehicles, but we've moved away from that. So as we replace the old fleet and some of the used fleet, we replace them a little every year in incremental fashion. But even according to facilities or fleets method, we still have 115 vehicles in the fleet that have exceeded the useful life points that I'm assuming someone's going to explain through the budget process. But by their own review, we still have over 100 vehicles that have exceeded their useful life, but we continue to use them. So replacing them incrementally, eventually, I mean, it'd be nice to lease 50 or 60 vehicles. It'd be wonderful. We can't afford that. So we're trying to do it in incremental amounts that we can afford.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Swartz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, on page 94 of the budget book, it talks about motor vehicles. In 2012, the 230,716, and then 2013, 286,875, and then 2014, 600,000, and then 2015, 900,000. So how many vehicles did we have back in 2012, and how many will we end up with in 2015?
We are reducing the size of the fleet. In other words, for every new vehicle that comes in, we take old vehicles out of the fleet that exceed that number. So the object is to reduce the fleet a little at a time. Incrementally, we bring on new vehicles. We're trying to reduce the size of the fleet. So I would have to get you the exact numbers of the fleet we had then and we have now. But we are reducing the idea is to overall reduce the size of the fleet down to a more manageable number. A lot of those cars back in the early years were old cars. We have some cars in the fleet that are still 1998 Fords. Those cars are, roughly 16 years old, but they're not frontline vehicles. So we're trying to reduce those down over the period of time.
So we'll have less number of vehicles than we did in 2012?
The idea is to reduce, yes, straight answer, yes. We'll have less vehicles than we did in 2012 by a few as we get rid of more than we bring in.
Thank you.
Anything else? Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you. You want to go ahead and proceed?
The next item on the list is called Lawson Upgrade. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with it, but Lawson is it's our ERP system, or it's the system that we use internally. It's our accounting system. We use it as our procurement system, so it's really our financial software that we use. And what this is that this is a one-time Lawson upgrade, and as you know, with a lot of software companies, we're behind and we need to upgrade, or we're not going to be able to continue using Lawson. So if we want to continue using our current accounting system, this is something that we just plain have to do. So we're showing it here as opposed to in an operating budget because it's a one-time expense. We don't need to spend this every year. It's a one-time, so we're putting it in non-departmental. And this is, let's see. It's really due to changes in the underlying technology. And like I said, we really have no choice but to do this as long as we want to keep using Lawson. Certainly, if you have any questions, we have information technology here if you have more specific questions about that.
Oh, Mr. Smith.
Do we budget software upgrades as part do we set aside, kind of like we do with facilities, for specific, because I know all software eventually needs to be upgraded or you lose the ability to have it supported.
Yeah, if maybe IT can come up and answer specifically, I can tell you that in the IT fund, there are definitely reoccurring costs for the yearly kind of licensing and software costs that we know about. But I think it's that these one-time, these pretty high dollar ones that we need to come at it's not an annual, it's not always a yearly budgeted item, so sometimes it comes out like this. But I know that as the cost, part of the IT fund, they do include costs for like the ongoing upgrades that we need to do.
Yes, that's correct, council member. We do budget every year for software maintenance. That would normally cover minor software upgrades, but this is more of a major software upgrade that would not be covered under that maintenance.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mrs. Ortiz?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I know when we brought this, I thought there was so many included in that package, so many updates. Am I correct?
Typically we have annual updates that occur with the Lawson system. Yes, that's included in our annual maintenance. But this is a major upgrade, so that would not be included.
Okay, so just the annual, you said?
Yeah, there's patch releases every year that are covered under our annual maintenance that we get for free, that we apply. But this is a major upgrade that's not included in a patch, so.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
And I should have said this when you came up. You should probably identify yourself, because I know most of us probably know who you are, but some
Sorry.
don't, and the public doesn't. So when the chief comes up in his uniform, they probably know who he is when he's talking to us. But if anybody else comes to the mic, you might want to introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Mark Biswell. I'm the IT director.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, Mrs. Hiller.
As I recall, it's been maybe 5 years ago that we bought the Lawson system.
Correct.
And it was very expensive, but people felt that it was worth it. What were those annual payments, and are we done? Have we paid out that original purchase?
Yes, that's correct. In 2014 was our last lease payment. It was $619,135.
I was thinking it was about $600,000 a year. So we've got this one-time expense of $183, but that $600, whatever you just said, has dropped off.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Mr. Schmidt.
And I'm
assuming that this one-time expense is not a one-time expense. This is a version upgrade, which we'll probably have to go through in 2 or 3 years, as opposed to a patch.
Yeah, potentially.
Okay.
Correct.
Yes. Mr. Brown?
Since it is going to be an infrequent recurrent expense, is there any way to project and plan for that so you don't have an expense like this coming on where there's not money budgeted for it?
Well, typically that's driven by the technology company. It depends on where they take the product. It's always based on a product roadmap. They project out several years in terms of where they want to take that technology. Sometimes they're very willing to share that, sometimes they're not due to competition. So we could definitely go back and look to see if there's a way we could project for these one-time upgrades. But it's going to be a little difficult.
Not annual, but they are recurrent, correct?
Again, it depends on how it depends on the vendor and how often they make major changes to their underlying technology. So sometimes you see it. Majority of the time, they're just small upgrades that are covered under our annual maintenance.
Mr. City Manager, Mr. Colson?
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just want to make a comment here. One of the recurring themes that you've heard over the last couple of years is the whole concept of deferred maintenance and dealing with fleet, dealing with facilities, dealing with software upgrades and everything else. We have gone through a very challenging time economically, and last year Council took a good action which provided us a foundation. I think it's our responsibility as managers to really bring to you those things such as this particular upgrade that we really need to do it now. Sometimes we can defer it. Sometimes it makes sense not to spend the money. But I think in the past we had a tendency not to bring those necessary expenses forward. Our hope is as we go forward we can provide good information and we make the right strategic decision going forward. But we continue to see a lot of those that we are kind of making up for decisions that were made in the past where deferred maintenance was put off too long and it gets more expensive. The old Fram commercial, pay me now or pay me later, the later is always more expensive. Fram pays me to say that.
Yes, Mr. Smith?
I just wanted to make one more comment. I'm not at all critical of this. Somebody who works in the IT field, I understand. I just wanted, the reason I ask these questions is to make it known that this is the way, unlike a lot of other recurring expenses, this is the way software works. You will have your patching or your regular updates, and then you have version upgrades, which is essentially a new product, and that's where you get these one-time. They're not one-time because everybody upgrades over time, but they're not necessarily on a schedule. So I think it's entirely appropriate to list it this way, and I appreciate that we're doing that we're pointing this out, so that we don't end up not doing it and then losing our service agreements and not having supportable software. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I don't see any other hands up, so I want to proceed.
Okay, so the next item on the list, it says fleet. What that really is fleet fees. And the fleet fund is an internal service fund, again, where we have a couple of garages and a fleet staff that takes care of our own city-owned fleet. And the way that that's funded is by charging our own departments. And the way that that charge is determined is by both prior year actuals and the costs that those garages need to operate. So in 2015, the reason that the general fund needs to pay more for fleet fees is simply that keeping up our fleet is costing us more. There's a couple of reasons for that. One of that is our fleet is aging. So as our fleet is aging, if we're not able to replace any of our vehicles, you know, personally too, that it starts to cost more just to keep them up, meaning in 2013 our expenditures were a little bit higher, so the 2014 fees were based on those higher expenditures. In addition, the cost of some of the full-time employees' wages and benefits in the fleet fee are going up, so also more revenues are needed in this fund just to keep up with those costs that are inflating. I see we have the expert here to answer any questions that might come up.
Yeah, Mr. Colson?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And the reason that I asked Doug to come up, because I think it's important given the last comment that we had and the previous comments with the police department, We have conducted an analysis of what would be involved in updating our fleet. The obvious payoff is that when you have an old fleet, you pay a lot of money for maintenance. When you have a new fleet, you pay less for maintenance, but there's a significant upfront cost in buying those materials. So if you'll allow me, I'd like to have Doug maybe spend just a minute talking about that study. And we don't have a solution to this yet, but I wanted at least to provide some texture to this conversation. I think it's important for you to hear.
Yeah, and I might also, before I go to you, Doug, I might also say you might want to also, for people who don't know, I mean, we all know when we're talking about the police vehicles or we're talking about fire, but you might describe what some of the other, when we're talking about fleet in general, what are we talking about? And then go into your comments.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, within our fleet, which is about, I think it's around 900 vehicles, approximately for when I say vehicles and major equipment. And so we are broken down into 3 major areas that we maintain vehicles and equipment. Number one, I have the equipment maintenance garage, which is down at 201 at Street Department. It's maintaining all of the dump trucks, everything related to street, and the utilities. And of course, everything the utilities and the street department have are big toys, for lack of a better term. They're, loaders, backhoes, semis, dump trucks. Those are very expensive equipment to maintain and also purchase. Street sweepers, we have 7 street sweepers. A street sweeper pushes $175,000 to $200,000 just to replace one of them. So these equipment, is expensive. Then we have what we call the heavy maintenance garage, I think is what we call it. It's over here at Station 3, Fire Station. They maintain all of the fire trucks. Again, that's a specialty. That's something you can't run those trucks to Jiffy Lube to get the oil changed, et cetera. Those are maintaining all of those trucks, and obviously there's a lot of specialty equipment on those trucks, so that's another division there. Then we have the light duty garage, which is right here, which again, we say maintains our sedans, but again, our sedans primarily are Chief Miller's group, which are on the road 7x24. So again, they are in constant use and constantly on the road. So, and obviously, not that they get used and abused, but I mean, if you drove your family car 7x24, there's a lot of wear and tear on it. So we have gone back, so those are the 3 major areas so that people understand what we're maintaining. When we say a sedan fleet, it's primarily, we have a few other sedans, which obviously are rather easy to maintain, but a police, a fleet is very expensive to maintain, but obviously they have to have it. Fire, the same thing, and then also the heavy equipment, et cetera. We have done a study of the equipment. We have identified, what we need to replace based on replacement criteria, which would be probably what would be out there in the industry standard. It would take $5 to $6 million, I think, or $6 to $9 million, depending on where we're at, to replace, just do a one-time replacement, just to upgrade the ones that are really in serious shape. So again, we are still looking through that is what is the best way to fund that? Do you do an equipment fund and, pay in, each group would pay into an equipment fund? Those are things that we're trying to determine to bring to you is what's the best way to fund. In the meantime, the police department obviously has gone to the lease to try to upgrade their vehicles. Again, we were talking about energy efficiency and like that. Obviously, the newer vehicles that are coming in for the police department obviously are a more fuel efficient vehicle than the older vehicles he had. What Fleet is doing, so that you understand, is you would say what should happen is as you bring more vehicles in, you should have less to repair. What we're doing to assist the chief, so that you understand, we're doing the upfit for those 30 vehicles that come in each year. And by the upfit, I mean we're having to put in all of the specialty equipment that goes inside, his vehicles, which obviously his officers need out on the street. So we're doing that along with repairing, having to maintain the vehicles. So that's keeping our staff, basically, we're not upgrading the fleet, so we're not seeing a reduction in work. But at the same time, if we weren't doing that for him with internal labor, we would have to be paying somebody else to do that, so we would have additional cost on top of that. So those are some things we're doing there. Others in there outside the general fund, utilities is trying to, is setting aside funds to go with that. what we did with the fleet and looking at our, you know, snow and removal funds and like that, we're looking at how can we, you know, through our motor fuel tax, replace some of that equipment, because if we want to enhance our snow plan, we need to upgrade our equipment, or we're going to have less, you know, we're going to have more breakdowns, and then we're going to be in more serious trouble out there. So that's kind of where we're at right now, but we are, you know, doing the study. We've identified vehicles that are underused, and we're getting those out of the fleet right now. Some of those are in the police department, and it's just the natural changeover of as his new fleet is coming in, when we're working with them to sell those vehicles off. Obviously, there's not a lot of money to come from them because they are so aged and wore out.
Do we have any questions? Yes, Mrs. Hiller.
I appreciate that review of the fleet, because that's one of the ones I told staff that I was interested in seeing. I mean, if you separate those three that we had, I thought that with fire, with us purchasing 10 trucks on a lease purchase just straight out, and we're now, what, at least 3 years into the purchase at the rate of about 2 per year of replacement, I thought by now we were on track with fire. And then with police, but if we're not, with police, the idea also was we had to keep the officers on the street. We were we were literally holding fire trucks together with baling wire. With police, they needed to be on the street. And then Public Works, when we got in, and this is my 6th budget cycle, when I came on, you know, they couldn't even run the street sweepers because they were in such bad shape, so we weren't sweeping the streets, and they were not even running or close to it. But I thought we'd replace them at this point, and that we were getting on track and the idea that we were sold with was go ahead and do these leases because we will have a corresponding drop in our maintenance expenses, and that should help balance out. It may be a different answer for police, fire, and Public Works, and actually everybody else, because we have other vehicles as well with the city. Is there sort of a meter? I mean, where are we with being in a regular rotation? And related to that, when would this number then stabilize or start to drop?
Deputy Mayor, council members, good morning. The vehicle replacement plan that's in place for fire is on our pump apparatus. It's about a 10-year replacement plan. It's the recommendation made by fleet. And for our aerial and larger trucks, it's about a 12-year replacement. So we did replace 9 with the lease purchase, and 1 additional one, and that has reduced our maintenance. We do the PMs on them, but in terms of when does it just level out, I don't know exactly when that is, because 10 years come back around pretty quick. With the 2-year, we're replacing about 2. You are correct, about 2 a year, and we're setting at a very comfortable level for us right now, but we don't want to get away from that plan to where we're finding ourselves having to try to replace 9 of them at a time again.
Absolutely not, and that wasn't my point. Have your maintenance expenses dropped then from fire, fleet maintenance?
That's probably a better question for
Okay.
fleet, to be honest. I don't look at those numbers.
I'm just trying to figure out where we are, because we made some significant investments in replacement with the idea that we'd be stabilizing this and
Absolutely, the
reducing.
reliability of the apparatus has changed. As those of us who were around recall, we were actually literally dropped 2 tanks on responses, so we don't have that concern, which is huge.
I think part of it too is within the fleet fees, again, it's the mechanics, the garages, et cetera. As far as the parts go, at least the way I follow everything, the parts are actually charged. The chief pays for his parts to his trucks. This is the staff on duty. I think we only, with the size of the garage that we have over there at the fire garage, obviously there's still a fleet. Those are specialty vehicles, again, that you're trying to maintain. So again, to outsource that work or take it outside can be extremely expensive, and obviously he needs, and time consuming from the standpoint of is then you may have to schedule the work where if he has something break down, we have to work it right into the garage. So I'm not, you know, as far as the ongoing work, even with a 10-year truck, the trucks are getting more expensive, they're getting more sophisticated, and you've got to, in fact, I think I've got some mechanics that are a mechanic that's going to some training just to be able to learn, you know, how to maintain the equipment on these trucks. So yes, I can say probably as the trucks have gotten newer, your day-to-day operational, you know, should be leveling out. But again, you know, there's a lot of specialty items on those trucks that have to be maintained, and my understanding is, you know, we basically are trying to maintain that in-house, you know, with our own mechanics. So
That's enough for now, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I guess we're ready to move on.
Ready to get back to page 8? Okay. The next item on the list there is called IntelliTime fee, and this seems like a recurring theme here. This is another internal service, an internal fee that we're charging to our own departments. I don't know how many of you are familiar with IntelliTime, but this is our timekeeping system that we purchased, I believe, in 2013. Prior to that, all of our city departments were still using all different kinds of timekeeping, and as you can imagine, that's a lot of staff time for payroll, not always accurate, of course not a very good way to operate a business when you have over 1,100 employees. So IntelliTime was purchased a couple of years ago as basically our automated timekeeping system. And so for a couple of years we've been paying for the cost of this out of non-departmental since it was a citywide benefit. Starting in 2015, we're going to be charging back to departments based on the number of employees that they have. They'll be contributing towards the ongoing costs of the IntelliTime systems. The idea is that the departments that are using it more will be paying for it more. So the way that this was calculated was a per employee per month basis, and simply in 2014 we just weren't budgeting for it in the same manner. We're still paying for it in 2014, and it's about the same cost in 2014. It's just around $94,000 for the system in 2014. In 2015, it's going to be a little bit more, and this reflects the cost that departments will be charged just for the maintenance and the ongoing costs of the system.
Is there any questions? Yes, Ms. Ortiz.
How is charging this back to the department? Is that just so you can see what they're using as opposed to clumping it all together?
Yeah, really the philosophy behind this is kind of going along with the whole cost of service model. If you really want to know how much it costs a certain department to operate or a certain program to operate, if you don't charge things like this to departments, you're not really capturing how much it costs to operate a certain department. So this is really consistent with why we charge most of our fees back to departments, is to be able to say, this is how much X department, X program costs us to run the city.
Okay, because I'm saying like our bigger departments, they're going to take a big hit,
That-
of course, because.
That is true. So that's one of the things departments had to do. For example, in 15, if departments had to start budgeting for this fee, so they had to absorb it, meaning they had to decrease another account to make up for this account. So that is true.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Any other questions? Okay. Moving on.
Okay, the next item on the list is, this is CAPERS. This is the retirement contribution that we make for pretty much everybody in the city other than police and fire. And again, this is a number that is set by the CAPERS board and provided to us. The reason this is up is, number one, if people are making a little bit more, then we're contributing incrementally more to CAPERS, but also the CAPERS percentage increased as well. The 2014 number that was in the budget for CAPERS was 8.84% was the number that we used in the budget. And actually the number that we're actually being charged is a little bit more than that. It's around 9%. The reason for that is sometimes you have to set the budget before you know that final number from the CAPERS board. So in 15 we budgeted simply a little bit lower. So we're actually charging in our actuals a little bit more than that. In 15 the assumption which was provided to us from CAPERS is 9.78%. So that's almost just a little bit under a 1% from the 2014 budget. And of course, across the whole city, when most of our employees are in CAPERS, that's a pretty big hit to the budget. So this would not only be for the cost of full-time salaries, but also any overtime, any other kind of compensation that employees get. We pay CAPERS on top of that as well.
Questions? I don't see any.
Okay. City elections, this is an item here that we've budgeted for in a couple of different places. This is something that really the city clerk's office handled, so that's in the executive department. And what we've done this year is we've actually put this back into the non-departmental budget, and really the reason for this is that this is the cost of whenever we have a primary election, which as I understand it is every other year in the odd years. We have to pay a certain amount of money. This is provided to us for the county to run that election. So in 2014, there wasn't a major election. The number that we had was 25,000. In 2015, it's going up to 120,000, and that's because we have a major election. So this is really a pretty set number that, kind of like the Lawson, it's not an annual, but it is something that you have to budget for every few years.
Any questions? Yes, Mr. Manspeaker.
I'd just be interested in seeing if my even number colleagues would be willing to strike that line item completely, and then we would have to have an election next year. Sorry, kidding. Thank you.
Seconded.
Well, moving on.
Okay, the next item is electricity, and this is an item I think we started to get into it in the conversations about what we're doing with our energy management. This is going up in the 2015 budget for a couple of reasons. One reason is when we set our electricity budgets, we really encourage departments to look at their prior year actuals. So however much you spent in 2013, we think would be a good starting place for the 2015 budget. So this is based not only on usage, but also on rates. There was a slight increase to Westar, I think maybe at the end of 2013, to their rates. So this wouldn't capture an increase not only to rates, but also to usage. This is something that, as we mentioned before, every department budgets for in their own accounts. So you'll see an electricity line in all of the different departments and all the different funds.
Yes, Mrs. Hiller.
Back to the energy conservation plan, are the departments monitoring actual usage? You know, the rates can affect what it looks like, but are they monitoring usage? I say that in part because I had a comment from one employee who said, well, now that the guy who was over the plan was gone, they could use their space heaters again because nobody was looking, things like that. Are we monitoring actual usage?
Perhaps Mr. Whitaker could come up and answer that.
From actual usage,
You know,
whether each department.
kilowatt hours versus the bill.
Yes, since each department pays their own bills coming through, do we actually have, are we monitoring actually the bills to know? I can't know that I can answer that. As far as our energy policy and the things we have in place, those policies are still in place, and we probably need to go out and re-emphasize to some, you know, if they're utilizing equipment that they, you know, should not be, and that, but again, that would have to be within the departments from the standpoint, because I don't know, as Public Works has, or facilities has a police, you know what I mean, to go around and police everybody's office. But I mean, we probably need to re-emphasize coming into the season.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Taylor Issa.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Doug, as we're looking at electricity bills and we're thinking progressive and trying to save, has there been any talk about solar panels and the usage of that, so that we can start evaluating the cost effectiveness of our electricity bills? Because eventually, I know that it's a big investment. I'm not saying that we would just go ahead and buy a whole bunch of solar panels and start acting, because I know that it's costly to start. But eventually, you start feeding back into the grid, and we don't have to pay. So it starts paying back to us. Has this been something that we've thought about?
Actually, can I ask Brandon to come up? The zoo, I think, is working on a little project with Westar, so maybe let him address it.
Thank you, Councilwoman. On the city's behalf, Friends of the Zoo has recently applied for a grant through Westar Energy for a 10 and 20 kilowatt solar panel array. And what we know at this point is the low end of investment is about $45,000. The high end is about $78,000, depending on the model of efficiency that you're looking for. We hope hope to know by October if we are awarded one of those systems, which then would allow us to really get in and start evaluating what type of cost benefit that may have to the city.
Thank you very much. This is something that I'll keep on talking about because the cost effectiveness of this is remarkable, and it eventually does pay for itself. So thank you very much.
Yes, Mr. Brown.
Before you leave, Mr. Whitaker, new guy question. Since each of the departments are responsible for their electricity usage, their energy usage, do they each have a current energy management plan, and who reviews those?
As far as the energy management plan, I believe the city overall has an energy management plan, and working with the sustainability board.
Okay.
Has developed a plan, and I think it was to reduce a certain percentage by 2020,
Right.
or something like that, but it's an overall city plan, is my understanding.
But it's at department level now, correct?
It would be, throughout the city, that each department would be. Facilities, let me back up on that. Obviously, if we need to put in energy efficient equipment and like that, it's probably gonna fall back to facilities, because the departments don't go out and actually, buy that type of equipment or change the light fixtures or, from that standpoint, or put in the light sensors for, offices, restrooms, et cetera. That would come through facilities. As far as monitoring, are we plugging in space heaters and like that, that portion there would be, would have to be out through the departments.
So the answer is yes, they do each have a plan?
We're following the overall city, I believe, yes. I don't know if they have an actual written, but there is a city plan that says this,
Okay.
and this for the city.
Thank you.
Let me go to Doug, see if he has a comment on that.
Deputy Mayor, thank you. It sounds as if from these questions and other questions we've gotten and some of the promptings, that this is an area where we probably need to invest some efforts and getting more in line with what the city council's philosophy is. We've talked about fleet fees and IT fees and those sorts of things, trying to centralize those better. It sounds as if this is also an area where we need to maybe take our overarching plan and get it down to departments better, so that we know as managers what's going on in each department.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are nearing the 10:30 mark, and we're almost halfway through our list on this page, so I think we'll go ahead and take a 10-minute break.